Hi everybody, it's great to be back here again. Tomorrow's Friday. Last week's portion, if we look in chapter 16, at the end of the portion, Torah talks about Amalek. And it says, Vayavo Amalek vayilachem Yisrael berefidim. The Amaleks came and they fought against Israel in Refidim. And Moshe right away says to Joshua, choose soldiers and go out and fight against Amalek. And it says when Moshe Rabbeinu raised his hand, they were successful. When he put his hand down, they were weakened. And then, of course, the Torah goes on to say how this is going to be a war for generation to generation, right? Until God's throne is complete in the land, we're going to be constantly battling against Amalek. Right after that, we begin this week's portion. This week's portion is called Yitro. And we start to discuss how Yitro, this priest of Midian, he hears everything that happened with the people that God took the people of Israel out of Egypt, and about the splitting of the Red Sea. And here, the opposite. It's absolutely amazing. We see Yitro is a man who the Zohar Kadosh says he didn't leave one type of idol worship in the world that he didn't actually experience. And that's why the Torah calls him the priest of Midian. Because the great question is, why is Yitro called the priest of Midian? Why is he called the priest of Midian for? You know, it says in the Torah now, a Jewish law, that when a person repents, you're not allowed to bring up his past. So here the Torah right away says he used to be this idol-worshipping priest. Why do you want to say to the whole world this was an idol worship in the past? You want to hide that. And the Zohar Kadosh, the famous great master, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, answers the question. He says, well, the Torah wanted to teach us that he didn't leave one stone unturned as far as theology. He went to every possible idol worship, and he did everything. And at the end, he came to realize that there was only one true Torah, one true religion in the world. That's Torah Hashem, the beautiful Torah of the Jewish people, following the way of Hashem outlined in the Torah, doing the Jewish laws, commandments, the 613 commandments. We see in the name Yitro has almost 613 in it, right? So it's absolutely amazing. And this is a Yitro who actually comes and becomes Jewish and adopts the Jewish Torah and the Jewish religion. This is the opening of this week's portion. It's so interesting how it's connected to last week's portion to show the other side. You have Amalek, those who oppose, and his whole goal of Amalek in Hebrew comes from two words meaning lak, lilkok, lilakik, means to lick up. He wanted to lick up the people of Israel just swallow them up. The Midrash brings down like the way a dog swallows blood of someone. That's the Amalek who's chasing after the people of Israel. On the other hand, you have Yitro, again, who sees the world, he sees what's going on in the world, and he's the opposite. He wants to come and join under the wings of Torah, and join the nation of Israel. These two sides follow us throughout history. Way back, it began, and way back, and way forward, it continues. These two sides that are opposing sides, those who join the people of Israel, who support the people of Israel, and those throughout the ages are constantly battling against the people of Israel. These are the two sides that we see throughout history. As Isaiah says, at the end of days, the nations of the world will come to Jerusalem, and they will come up to the mountain. And Jerusalem, right, they want to, and later on it says they want to learn from us, etc., and follow our way, but it doesn't say that everyone who comes up to the mountain will follow the way of Hashem. So I thought of maybe an idea of Isaiah saying that everyone's going to be looking at this mountain of Hashem, of Jerusalem being rebuilt and what's going on. And not everyone is going to react the same way, just like then. Those who will follow us and will stand with us. But unfortunately, there will be those that will try to war against us until the end of days, until finally, of course, we will come out victorious. God's people, the people who follow God, the goodness in the world will overcome the evil that we see surrounding us every single day. Unfortunately, the world is surrounded by terrible, terrible, evil things. You don't have to look far. These crazies are running around burning people and cutting people's heads off, the ISIS and other evil people in the world that unfortunately are constantly battling and fighting against goodness in the world. And it's so important that the Torah, the light of the Torah, comes out and shines, because the Torah has the power of rectification. It can rectify the entire world and bring true peace and true goodness to the world, which we're looking for so greatly. One great question, after all this said and done, we see how Yitro is so powerful, and it's not only that it's mentioned in our sources, and that the sons of Yitro, his family, throughout the generations were Torah scholars, and we see how they actually served in the temple, in Lishkat HaGazit. They were Sanhedrin, part of the Sanhedrin, part of the great courts of Israel. And we see later on, if we look in the book of Judges, we see how the family of Yitro goes to settle in Judah, near Arad, the desert of Arad, to study with the Ya'abetz. Ya'abetz is a great Torah scholar, was Otniel ben Knaz. They're constantly Torah continuing to follow them in the family, the Yitro, because he adopted the house of Israel and joined the house of Israel. He benefited throughout generations of Torah following him his whole life, his whole family, all the generations. As a matter of fact, so of course, who knows how many people of Yitro amongst us today follow Torah. When we look over here in chapter 18, we see what kind of beautiful, how do we say, Kabbalat Panim in Hebrew, when you want to greet people, greeting, that he was greeted when he came back from Midian. He came to Moshe Rabbeinu, and it says like this. It says in verse number 7 in chapter 18, Vayetze Moshe likrat chodom. Moshe Rabbeinu goes out to greet his father-in-law. Vayishtachul, he bows down. Vayishakul, he kisses him, and he asks one another asks how you doing, etc. And then he goes on to say everything that happened. And if you follow the verse, he goes on to say, Vayom Yitro Baruch Hashem asher hatzil etchem miyad Mitzrayim. Yitro blesses God that he saved you from Egypt and from the hands of Paro. And he goes on to say that God is the greatest of all gods. And then we go on to see, Vayavo Aaron b'chol ziknei Yisrael, and Aaron and all the elders of Israel came out to eat bread with the father-in-law of Moshe Rabbeinu. So it's not only Moshe Rabbeinu coming out, of course, he's the greatest of Israel, right, the leader, but the entire Aaron and all the entire house of Israel. Can you imagine the wonderful greeting that Yitro received? And all this honor is given to Yitro for the great change that he did in his leaving idol worship aside. Look how much honor he has, and throughout his children for every generation. With all this, again, getting back now, I want to place the question here at hand is, if we look at the end of chapter 18, it's the last verse. It says something very, very strange we have to pay attention to. It says, Vayishlach Moshe et chotno vayelech lo elatzo. Moshe Rabbeinu sends his father-in-law, and his father-in-law goes out to his land. What happened over here? Right before the receiving of the Torah, Yitro seems to be sent away. And that's so strange. Here Yitro is adopting Am Yisrael to be part of the Torah. The Torah, of course, wasn't given yet, according to certain opinions. In the order of the way that things are here in this week's portion, it seems like for sure Yitro comes before the Torah was given, although there are other opinions that the Torah, we know, is not in every instance in chronological order. It could be that he came after the Torah was given already. But we see the opinions that say he came before the Torah was given, we see by the fact he's mentioning the splitting of the sea and hearing about leaving Egypt. He didn't mention, he would have mentioned the hearing of the Torah, right, given. So if Yitro came before the Torah was actually given, what kind of adoption of the Torah commandments were? The Torah wasn't given yet. But the answer is very simple. We know that Abraham already adopted in the beginning. He was the founder of Hashem, right? The founder of the philosophy of one God and no other intermediates or anyone else, only one Hashem in the world. And that was Abraham, who passed this down to his children. And of course, way before, the Torah was given, we speak about Jacob studying Torah in the house of Shem ben Eved. There was Torah being studied. What kind of Torah? Again, it was the Torah of the forefathers, of meditating and understanding the oneness of Hashem in the world, and being able to, there was such high level of individuals that they were able to connect to the Torah that was up in the heavens before it actually came down, which was amazing. So anyway, those who say that Yitro came before the Torah was given, obviously, that's what he adopted. He adopted the concept of one Hashem, one God, and joined the house of Israel, the nation of Israel. Later on, of course, to receive Torah, etc. So the question, again, giving all that aside, is to be asked is, why was he sent? Where did he go? What did he do when he was sent away? What happened over him? Right away, Rashi comes along and says, well, when he was sent away, what did he do? He went to go bring others. It wasn't enough that he found this beautiful light and this beautiful connection to Torah. But Yitro wanted to go out and bring others and get others involved so they can enjoy the beautiful light of Hashem. And that's what he wanted. Just like Abraham did, Yitro goes out to his family and to his friends, to his acquaintances, to try to go bring other people to the Torah itself and to let them enjoy the beautiful light of the Torah. I think this great example we should follow so well of understanding today the great interest so many people have in the world of joining Torah and studying Torah, becoming part of the nation of Israel, or those who don't want to become part of the nation of Israel want to connect and keep the laws, basic laws that apply to the universal laws that apply to the world. We say 7 laws of Noachad, but they're much more than 7 laws. That's just the founding, the beginning. But they branch out to many different areas. There's a whole beautiful way of following Hashem through the Torah without being Jewish, but just following Hashem, connecting. And this is really what Yitro went out and reached out to all his neighbors and his friends, etc. He tried to do. And this important lesson is very important, again, for those who are out there and looking in this world, looking to find direction in this world, who haven't found, again, found an answer to their spiritual needs. They can realize, look at Yitro, you can turn to Yitro and say, wow, he's an example of what someone is looking for truth, could find it within the Torah itself and connecting themselves to the people of Israel. But anyway, here's a quick lesson for today. Hope you have a wonderful Shabbat. We'll be in touch very soon. Shabbat shalom, b'sorot tovot, yeshuot v'nechamot. Bye-bye.